The problem is you do see a lot of antisocial people succeed. Loneliness is as big a risk factor for ill health and death.
We live inside our heads.
You go cold turkey, you go into withdrawal.
There is a lot of value in the stuff that we struggle with.
Better Thinking. Conversations with experts exploring all things psychology. Welcome back to Better Thinking. My name's Nesh Nikolic, and today I have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Poppy Watson, a leading researcher who has an interest in researching the intersection of compulsive reward-seeking behaviour and how motivation, attention, salience and advertising affect choice behaviour. Working at the University of Technology, Sydney, and maintaining her role as an adjunct lecturer at UNSW, Dr. Watson explores the mechanisms behind reward-seeking behaviour, from compulsive patterns seen in addiction and obesity to milder forms like overeating or excessive social media use in healthy individuals. Her work not only unravels why maladaptive habits emerge, but also informs interventions to improve outcomes for clinical patients, blending health psychology and behaviour change into her research. I found Dr. Watson's work fascinating, and I'm left with so many questions and thoughts about how I can integrate her insights into my own life and also into my clinical work. I'm thrilled to share with you Dr. Watson's perspectives, and so let's jump straight in. Poppy, a big thank you for coming onto the show today. I'm really excited to talk about this concept of compulsive reward-seeking behaviour. I know that it's relevant in all walks of life as being humans, but in particular trying to understand these biases for all of us. Being human means that we're all afflicted by the same things, and this is one that I think is prevalent and has always been, but most certainly is today as well.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Can I start with asking you about how you got into this research? What is it that brought your attention to this and obviously has led to you researching this in great depth?
I think, like a lot of people, during my master's and PhD, I was really influenced by the people around me, and I was in the Netherlands at that time at the University of Amsterdam, and worked with Sanne de Wit, who's an expert in habit research, and she's really got a background in behavioral neuroscience and translating a lot of paradigms that we use in animal models of reward seeking and behavior, translating that to humans. So I was involved in a lot of projects looking at how humans behave when in these very highly controlled lab tasks where stimuli are presented and people have to make choices on which lever to respond on, exactly like we do with animals who are doing these things in Skinner boxes. And that really, led to this kind of this passion of mine to really understand these basic mechanisms of behavior and how they then, can, in the extreme end of the scale, can lead to problematic or contribute to problematic behaviors like we see in addictive behavior, that kind of tendency for people to struggle to stop carrying out a behavior, where do cravings come from, all those types of features that we know are really important in problematic behaviors. Looking at trying to understand, those kind of basic mechanisms as they exist in the healthy population. I think that these come from they're very ingrained behaviors that we see across all species that are very actually adaptive. This tendency to rely on stimuli in the environment to guide our behavior, this tendency to orient to things that signal reward or that signal punishment. But for some people, that gets very pathological, right? And they find it very difficult to stop focusing on things that are signaling potential reward, or in the case of anxiety, it's argued that, or phobias, people really struggle to disengage from things that are signaling punishment. So these kind of mechanisms that exist in all of us can go awry. So that's kind of been the focus of my work, since that time of the PhD, which was 10 years ago now.
And are there certain conditions that lead to the orientation towards whether it's seeking reward or seeking removal of punishment, that the research shows what are the conditions that happens more likely, where it becomes more obsessive or compulsive in nature?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess what we see is that everyone struggles to ignore things that signal rewards. We've done this with food rewards, we've done it with monetary rewards. So the way we set it up is that we say to people, okay, we want you to, we use eye tracking quite frequently, and we say we want you to orient search a display, search the screen for a diamond, and you have to just move your eyes to the diamond, and you're going to get rewarded on each trial. And there is always a colored circle, which is a distractor. Now, that might be associated with, we might say to them, if they see an orange circle, you're going to get $1 on every trial. And if you see a blue circle in the display, you're going to get, 10 cents. Or we might say the orange circle means you're going to get some cucumbers, and a blue circle in the display means you're going to get a bit of chocolate at the end. And then on every trial, people just have to move their eyes to the diamond, and they can actually ignore these colored circles, which we term the distractors. But what we see, across the board is that even if you set it up so that you say to people, if your eyes register on that colored circle, then you're going to lose the reward on that trial. So people know, okay, I've just got to ignore the colored circle, then I'm going to get the reward that's signaled as long as I don't look at it. But people find it really hard not to look at it, because it's signaling, and the high reward one, the one that's signaling the chocolate or the one that's signaling the $1, that's even harder to not look at, even though the participant is completely aware that they should, especially on those trials where there's a high reward at stake, try really hard not to look at it. So that's something that we see across, it's a very replicable effect that we see, that people find it really hard to ignore these stimuli. And we've also done a variant where that's signaling punishment. So we say to people, if there's an orange circle in the display, if you look at it, you're going to hear a really horrible loud noise in the headphones. And if there's a blue circle in the display, there won't be any consequence, but just ignore the colored circles, look for the diamond on every trial, and you'll be fine. You'll never hear the loud noise. But we find that about 75% of trials, people inadvertently look at that colored circle. And it's not just because of the color. So we always have that control condition, which is lower in motivational salience. So, we might have a color that signals no punishment, or we have a color that signals only 10 cents. And so we know that it's not just the color, because we can counterbalance that. So for some people, orange is associated with the loud noise and blue is not, or vice versa. And we see that it's not to do with the color of the stimulus that's distracting them. It's this motivational significance that it's paired with. So it's about 75% of the time participants will look at something even though they know it's causing this horrible noise in the headphones. And with the reward variant, it's about 30% of the time people will look at this thing and they'll miss out on the reward that's being signaled, either the money or the food when they're really hungry. So it's a very common behavior. But what we have seen is that people who really struggle to ignore these reward distractors, that's related to, things happening in people's daily lives, which might be, difficulties controlling food consumption. It might be people who have riskier alcohol use behavior. A colleague in Monash has done this great study where she linked the tendency to be able to ignore these reward distractors to the likelihood someone would succeed in a 1-month alcohol abstinence challenge. So even though the distractors were monetary rewards, we still see that they have significant predictive value in terms of, like this one, the success in being abstinent of alcohol for a whole month. And in a recent study, we also found in a clinical sample that individuals who at baseline had more problematic alcohol use disorders. This is a treatment-seeking sample. Participants who had higher, riskier, more problematic alcohol use, stronger cravings when they first went into the treatment facility, they had the stronger tendency to look at they found it harder to ignore the monetary reward distractors, the high reward, and that actually predicted relapse 3 months later. So after finishing the treatment, it was a residential treatment center, and they leave after 3 months. And after we followed up with them after they'd left, and the tendency was just simply relapse, yes, no. So of those people who said they were planning to stay abstinent, the proportion who were able to succeed at that at 3 months later, the tendency to get distracted by these monetary rewards predicted that. So amongst other things, our craving at baseline was people who said they were really still craving alcohol at the baseline, the start of the treatment. Higher alcohol craving also predicted relapse, and together those two things independently predicted relapse to alcohol. So it's this fascinating thing where it seems to be kind of this pathological reward tendency, where the way that your brain focuses on reward orients to reward, especially when there's conflict there, right? So participants know, I've got to try not to look at it if I want to earn the money or if I want to earn the food. So there's this conflict there between wanting to do something and actually this kind of very automatic tendency to look at it. So that seems to be sort of an important marker for these problematic behaviors right up to drug and alcohol addiction.
And does it matter what level of value is placed on the item in terms of, if there's an increase value or a decrease in value, where you're still providing the instruction of, don't look at a yellow circle, but that the inherent reward or the inherent punishment is reduced. Does that moderate it as well? Or is there the fact of saying, don't look at it, kind of brings your attention? There's just the seeking compulsion, some sort of bias of saying, I need to look out for it because I've been told or I've been made aware of it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point, is that there's this kind of white elephant effect as well, right? Don't think of a purple elephant and then you instantly think.
Yep.
So there is definitely a factor of that going on. What we see is that you can get these effects even if participants are just playing for points. So even if there's no money involved, there's no food involved, there's no tangible reward, it's just participants are told, you're going to be earning points every time you do it, and then they get like these medals that are like, yay, you got 60,000 points, you're really good at this. We see that we still see this strong tendency to look at the things that signal more points, even though they're meaningless. There's been some work looking at it that suggests that it's about the relative value between the two rewards that are being offered, rather than the absolute value of the reward. And we often get asked by reviewers, how does it matter about, the socioeconomic status of participants? So is it that participants who really value $1 versus those participants who don't really care and it's not much money to them? Are we seeing stronger effects? And the answer is that no, we see this the relative reward value being offered, that it's actually seems to be this kind of very inherent bias in all of us, that something that's signaling a higher reward captures our attention, even though it's, even though we're motivated not to. And same with the punishment, with punishment potentially even stronger, that we orient to something signaling a punishment, even though we know we're causing the punishment by doing so. So it's a very maladaptive behavior, but that's just the way we've set it up in our experiments. Of course, in the real world, it makes sense that if you lived in a time when food was scarce, you should orient to any signal of reward that might be signaling the potential for food. And same with the punishment, right? For survival, you need to orient in. Your brain is attuned to look and respond immediately to things that are signaling threats or rewards in the environment. But it's just that in our environment, we are surrounded by signals of reward particularly. And we've actually started doing a line of research now where instead of using these colored stimuli that we tell participants are associated with something high reward like chocolate or, $1 versus a low reward that's 10 cents or a bit of cucumber, actually we're now using things like the fast food logos. So the McDonald's M, it's such a powerful signal of food reward that young children can recognize it. We've done studies where we can show participants food logos for 100 milliseconds, and it's like 99% accuracy in identifying whether it's food or non-food related. So people can categorize them so well on this very brief. So they're so well learned that we're kind of capitalizing on this lifetime of learning that people have outside the lab, and then seeing if we say to people, if any eye gaze is registered on that McDonald's logo, then you're going to miss out on the money, or you're going to miss out on whatever. And yeah, people find it difficult to ignore them because they're incredibly salient. They're very familiar to us, and they're associated generally with positive emotional responses.
With the eye tracking research, how many items are usually displayed, and what are the other items that are shown?
So in the display, we've normally got 6 shapes around the screen, and one of them will be the diamond, which is what the participant's meant to be looking at. And then one of them will kind of stand out because of its distinctive color. And that's when we manipulate the association of those colors with rewards or punishments, to make sure that it's not just the color per se that's attracting attention, that it's actually its association with the high reward or punishment. But the other shapes in the display are gray. They're also circles, but they're not colored circles. But the diamond target, it stands out. So some people are excellent at just simply on every trial moving their eyes to the diamond. They never get distracted. They tend to have very good self-control and a really, and we know that participants, when they do these tasks, are really trying very hard not to get distracted. So it does involve executive control functions, as they call it. This idea that we need to recruit these higher order cognitive abilities to overcome this very basic tendency to just look at things in the environment that are rewarding or potentially punishing.
And has there been much play in terms of the colored shape being of the same? Sorry. Yes, no. If there were, let's say, a red circle, if it was just a circle but not red, so it's not really
Physically
a high contrast, does that change it because it's not as shiny, so to speak? It's not as pronounced, or simply because we know that there's a reward there, you're still seeking out the stimulus of saying where's the reward or where's the punishment. So you're trying to either avoid one or see one to just locate it, I suppose.
Yeah, no, there has been work done where all of the stimuli in the display are colored, and you can still see these effects. So it's not just simply that pops out due to its physical salience. I mean, that's certainly, there is a physical salience effect there, which, that's why we always counterbalance the reward associations with the color to make sure that it's not that just one color, like blue, might be more distracting to participants than orange. So to make sure that's not driving effects, we obviously make some participants have orange as the high reward color, some participants have blue as the low reward color. But these Pavlovian stimuli, they're signaling these rewards, and this is something that we see in the animal literature, that these Pavlovian cues have incredible power to attract attention and create these approach responses. So that's the way that we think of this working as well in humans, just showing the power of prior learning about something that signals a reward or punishment and how that can then affect your subsequent behavior. So to take that, to the real world and back to the idea of the McDonald's example, this idea that, you've learned your whole life that there's this association between these stimuli and these kind of burgers and fries. And there's a lot of evaluative conditioning going on. As children, we see that children are incredibly susceptible to the power of this marketing. Like my kids, whenever we drive past McDonald's, they want to stop. They don't even really like it, but they just love the idea of McDonald's. The Happy Meals and Ronald McDonald, all these associations mean that kids really value that brand. And what we're trying to get at now with this latest line of research is looking at how this affects adults and the choices they make in these type of experiments to kind of bias their attention and to act counter to their goals. So to set it up where we say, don't look at these, all you've got to do is not look at it. I mean, how hard does it sound, right? You've got some stimuli on the screen, you're looking for a diamond, just ignore the McDonald's M. You know exactly what it looks like. You don't need to look at it to make sure it's there. You can see it very distinctly in your peripheral vision. So just don't look at it and then you'll get the money. But what we see is that people, you're just attracted to it. You can't help it.
Yeah. It's fascinating because there's an inherent mechanism there. And by virtue of just saying don't look at it or focus on the one but not on these other specific ones, we go out and even if I'm assuming, and I'm making this up obviously, but maybe you can inform a little bit better. Even if there wasn't necessarily a reward or a punishment, by virtue of saying don't look at that one, I set up my own game. I set up my own competition. I set up my own, what value do I hold as a person? So I need to see the diamond, but don't go out and see, the red circle, because there's now a little game about, how disciplined am I or whatever it might be. And so by virtue of just knowing it, I could place my own reward system onto it. I'm assuming there's a potential for that to even occur.
That is true, but that's why, of course, we have the control condition where you might have McDonald's M on some trials, and then we'll have other colored shapes that are familiar on other trials. There might be other logos, but very boring logos like Excel or Word we've used in some experiments. So they're equally familiar and people get the same instructions. Don't look at them and you'll get rewarded with money. So we control for all those types of things. Yeah. And then we still see this difference in the food logos. And that is linked to people's dietary behaviors, right? So people who consume more fast food or have an unhealthier diet in terms of, saturated fat and free sugar, they seem to be particularly vulnerable to the effect of these cues, particularly these fast food logos. We've also done quite some interesting work. This is a bit of a tangent now, but following up on these logos is that we're just writing up a study at the moment where we ask people after they've done these, eye tracking experiments, we ask people to then rate the logos on on different brand logos, on how exciting they found the brands, how much they like the brands, how beneficial the brand's product are for their health, and how often they interact with the brand. And we ask people about the common global food brands, the McDonald's, the KFC, and also social media brands, all different types of brands. And what we actually found was that participants who interacted with these fast food brands more, who had higher rates of saturated fat and free sugar in their diets, they actually rated the brands as being better for their health than people who didn't interact with the brands. So unsurprisingly, people who are eating a lot of this food, they like the brands more, but they also seem to perceive them as being healthier for them, which is really interesting because we didn't find any effects of education, which is something you might think, well, people just don't really have a good understanding of how unhealthy this food is. But that's something we're trying to follow up with now, is to kind of figure out, is it that people don't understand, or is it that people kind of post hoc rationalize their behavior, kind of, well, I'm eating a lot of that food, it can't be that bad for me, really. That kind of convincing themselves that it's healthy, even though they probably actually know that it's not. So there's this I'm really interested in advertising these kind of emotional experiences we have with these brands that we're exposed to our whole lives, and how that then influences, our eating behaviors. And again, I think in the drug and alcohol space, it can be very hard for people to understand, the nuance of addiction, and why can't someone just stop? If someone's going to lose access to their children, they're going to lose their house, and they're saying, I want to stop drinking, and they can't, they simply can't. And that can be very, very hard for people, I think, to wrap their head around. But I think when you talk about, eating healthily, and I think a lot more people understand that kind of difficulty with, knowing that you should be doing one thing and then finding it really hard to do that because of all the temptation around. It's very hard to actually say no and ignore all these kind of temptations that are all around. And so I think, it's much easier for people to understand that kind of the way that these stimuli that are signaling food can make us feel hungry, can make us crave food, and can really lead to the tendency that we're going to eat something that we actually were planning not to. And I think that's very similar to, what we see with individuals who struggle with alcohol addiction or drug addiction, is that there are actually a lot of these cues around as well. Gambling and seeing all the adverts when you're watching sport, that's now so integrated, this idea of, the gambling adverts. So these kind of reminders are all around. And we know anecdotally that they cause craving and that they can increase the tendency of relapse. But I guess what we try to do is show that in an experimental way, in a very highly controlled way. So showing that in the lab.
It's fascinating that it ties in with what you said previously about relapse is increased if the baseline compulsion was higher, which, almost infers that, those coming into, whether it's a drug and alcohol situation or something similar, the higher the compulsion, the tougher it is when they are exposed to that advert, for example.
Yeah, I think
that there's a more visceral feeling that occurs, and therefore a greater impact or probability that they act on it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's important to know that, craving is not linked to how long someone's been addicted to alcohol, for example. So these effects are really independent of the severity of someone's, how long it's been going on for, how many times they've tried to quit in the past. It really seems to be this kind of, when they enter and the amount of craving that they're experiencing, it's incredibly powerful. And that seems to, I agree that it's what we're finding with these experiments where we're measuring this kind of tendency to be able to ignore a reward. And don't forget, we weren't using drug and alcohol rewards, we were using monetary reward, right? So it's a different type of reward, but the idea is that some people just have this very, the things that signal reward, it's a very general reward pathology. And we see that in that some people might be able to quit drug and alcohol and might pick up another addiction, or might overeat and become really into food. So this idea that some people are very sensitive to rewards, and that can really lead to this kind of compulsive behavior in one domain, and that can switch. And our data suggests that this is a very general reward pathology, that it's linked to that we're seeing these effects across different types of addictive compulsive behaviors. So we've currently got looking at binge eating disorder and seeing there whether we see a similar thing with the monetary rewards, such that individuals who, compared to controls, whether individuals with binge eating disorder also have this kind of reward pathology where, because with binge eating disorder, there are some overlaps with there's also a lot of differences, but there are, some people have argued that it's a very much similar to that kind of compulsive reward-seeking behavior that we see characterizing addiction, drug and alcohol use, that it might also be relevant for binge eating. So that's something that we're looking at. So my interests, are very broad about this kind of transdiagnostic understanding of these different pathologies that can arise, and do they have this kind of common reward issue?
Has there been any research that's looked into those that also have, high repetitive compulsive behaviors, but are on the, societally considered on the positive end, like let's say, people who exercise very frequently, that it's just become their part of their life. There's almost a compulsion to, I've got to do it every day. I have to go for a run or a gym session or something or other, and how they do eye tracking and how their reward and punishment system is it the same, but it's just attributed, it's just connected to a different reward system, and exercise being that reward rather than, let's say, gambling or food pleasure or mouth pleasure. Has there been any research in that space?
That's a really interesting idea, to link it to a more healthier kind of reward pathology in a way, promoting obsessive exercise and things. Not particularly with obsessive exercise. So Lucy Albertella again in Monash, she's done an interesting study looking at very lots of behaviors to do with addiction. So, carrying out behaviors that are difficult to stop, and people say, I'm consuming too much and I try to control, but I struggle to control my intake. And she also asked questions about more obsessive compulsive behaviors, like the tendency to, wash hands repeatedly, the tendency to check. So those kind of very common compulsions that we hear about with disorders such as OCD and things. And there she found again that this task that's looking at this ability to ignore monetary rewards, the participants who struggle to ignore the high reward distractor, that they score higher on all of these kind of compulsive measures. So I suspect that, anyone who's doing something repetitively and is, even if they're not getting reward from that, there seems to be this tendency to, pay more attention to these monetary distractors. So it's a really interesting phenomena when you start getting into that space, because, with OCD, it's not necessarily rewarding in the same way that seeking out alcohol is going to be. Many people, find it frustrating, the checking and that inability to be able to do anything that's not, that kind of the feelings of compulsion are not particularly rewarding. But we still nonetheless see these effects. But I think I would suspect with the exercise that anything that someone's doing that's giving them a lot of reward, and they're able to maintain that and get something out of it, then they potentially will show this. But the other side of it is control, right? So what we find especially in the food experiments, is that people who say in their daily lives that they have quite a lot of diet control, that they really watch what they eat, they count calories, they try very hard to maintain their body weight and watch what they eat, we find that those people are better able at ignoring these high reward distractors. So for foods that they currently would like to eat, if they know that they have to not look at them in order to get some of those at the end of the experiment, then we see that they're better able to do that. So there seems to be this link to control, like I said before about executive control. People who are able to kind of exercise that control in their daily lives, they are also better at ignoring those distractors. So it's kind of, I guess, to go back to the exercise thing, it's like, are people exercising obsessively because they're loving it and they're getting a lot of reward feedback, or are they doing it because they're incredibly controlled?
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of might expect two different things depending on what their
And
behavior.
is there any difference between a population that we might say is maintaining or mitigating control in a helpful way versus someone who is doing control in an unhelpful way, like, the extreme case of anorexia nervosa. Obviously, they've got great control. Might be very different reasons, but at least on face value, it appears as though they are holding incredibly great control. Obviously, the flexibility is not there, like what the more helpful side is. But is there any clues as to how they do control? Is there a difference between the two populations?
Yeah, we haven't looked at an anorexic population. That rigidity. I know we've done some work with habits and looking at this kind of inflexibility. So some colleagues in the Netherlands have done some work looking at anorexia nervosa and the tendency for this real controlled, inflexible behavior. We might expect that they would be particularly good at ignoring these reward distractors. That would be my hypothesis, but we haven't actually done that experiment.
And is there any clues as to how they do that? I imagine that many listeners, we're all prone to our own human yearnings and desires and the like. Are there things that moderate or allow us to improve some of that flexible, control that can assist us with being more, I suppose, present or mitigating against this bias, this natural bias that's there and evolutionary has lots of value?
That's a really interesting question. I think that's something that I've started to kind of get more interested in, recently, is trying to say, well, we've got these two sides of the coin, this very automatic bottom-up tendency to look at things as a signaling reward, and we know that executive control plays a role here. So how can people improve their tendency to not look at these things? So there's kind of two options, right? One is that you strengthen the control, strengthen those executive control processes, or possibly, I think, a better option is to try and reduce the salience of those reward signals. So the reason that I'm a bit skeptical about the increase in cognitive control is that I really think it's kind of something you have. I'm not sure it's something you can train. So for a long time, people have been trying to do things like working memory training, trying to improve people's ability to, have better working memory, which is a proxy for cognitive control, or training people to constantly to be able to, kind of work more efficiently and have more control power. But there's been a lot of work in that space, and I don't think we've ever really seen a convincing transfer. So people might get better at controlling their working memory in a particular task, but that doesn't seem to transfer to daily life. They don't seem to have better cognitive control abilities. So I think that's probably something that's quite kind of you're born with. On the other hand, trying to reduce the tendency that we'll orient to these things because they're less kind of salient. So one way might be pharmacologically. So that's something that I'm really keen to look at with these new drugs that have, been around for the last 7 years or so with the GLP-1 agonists with food rewards. So looking at, Wegovy or Ozempic, looking at how they affect this tendency to orient to rewards. Are they actually making the rewards less salient? So pharmacologically is one way. Another interesting route has received some attention in Europe, which has been, and I've seen some convincing randomized controlled trials for alcohol addiction, where people are trained repeatedly to not look at these things. So in these experiments, they use images of alcohol and soft drinks. And these appear on the screen, one picture of alcohol, one picture of a soft drink, and they disappear very quickly. And then participants have to report on the orientation of a target, which appears either behind the alcohol picture or behind the soft drink picture. And what they do in these experiments is that the target that the person has to respond to just always appears behind the soft drink picture. So to do the task quickly and to do it efficiently, if you just look at the soft drink image all the time, then naturally your attention will be at the right place to respond to the target when it appears. And participants aren't instructed about that. They just simply do the task over and over, maybe I think 4 times across 2 weeks, as some of these drug and alcohol clinics have used this approach. And amazingly, compared to treatment as usual, people seem to have reduced relapse, so around 13% 1 year later, which might not sound like that much, but relapse rate around 50%. So this is more like 35% of people are relapsing when they do this. And this is a really interesting thing. And I think probably what they're doing is really training the brain to say, in this situation, the soft drink is the more salient because it's more task relevant. The soft drink image is what they're just trained to repeatedly look at, and they're trained to ignore the alcohol. And so that might be something, I started the study during COVID, which unfortunately got annihilated by COVID. But yeah, I'd like to really do that. I'd like to do that, be able to see that for myself and see what effect this has on things like our reward tasks. So can we see that people can be trained to simply to get better at ignoring rewards, not by telling them not to do it, not by trying to improve their cognitive abilities, but more just kind of training that automatic tendency. I think that's what we need to target. But that's something that we're very much trying to get at, but it's really hard, as you can imagine.
That sounds like incredible research that should be investigated some more and obviously replicated to see, because that, 4 times over 2 weeks, even if we go out and call it an hour each time, is very little investment to have such a huge affect.
It
just sounds mind-blowing, right? At the same time,
links to those studies in the show
notes. But it does lean into that salience sort of theory, or what's been observed in other research as well, to go and understand, is this a control thing, executive control, or more about changing your relationship with it and creating a change in how rewarding it appears, and by virtue of training the other, it can mitigate against the alcohol, or potentially against other applications as well. But 13% is quite remarkable.
Yeah, no, they've done a few studies now, and they're decent. Their RCTs, they seem pretty decent.
Wow.
So I think it's a real thing. And yeah, I think we should be trying to. I would like to try and do more of that in the lab. But I think what's tricky is that you have these populations of people who have been really struggling with drug and alcohol addiction. They're at a residential facility. They're very motivated to quit. So you can try and do these kinds of studies looking more at the mechanism. So, for example, I might be able to do it in, healthy young adults and look at how doing this type of training affects their ability to ignore things in my task. When I'm telling them, don't look at the McDonald's logo and we'll give you some money.
Cool.
The issue is that there are people, you kind of probably need that motivation to change. And that's what we find with a lot of these kind of, if you want to influence people's behaviors in these very subtle ways, probably you need to have a strong dose of motivation as well. So me doing it in the lab with students, they're probably, they can do the training, but they don't really, they're not really motivated to change their behavior. So it's potentially unlikely to have any effect on their kind of reward processing. So it does make these kind of experiments difficult to carry out, because you need to have, it's putting a lot of burden on this population of individuals who already have a lot of burden because of the circumstances they're in.
Where would you like to see more of your research? Whether it's funding, where you would go out and lean into more, if there was that magic wand, if you could have more team members, where would you focus on a little bit further with where you've currently come to, and where the literature's also come to?
Wow, I mean, there's just so many. I think that's the great thing about working in research is that there's just such an overwhelming amount of cool research questions that could be followed up. I'm really interested in the advertising space at the moment about this idea about what effect does advertising have on our behavior? And, someone said to me the other day, I was talking about at the health psychology conference, I was talking to someone about it because we're starting to look at, these food brands and how they influence people's perceptions of health and how they influence behavior in these kind of controlled lab tasks. So we're trying to find evidence that they actually do affect people's decision making, that they actually affect people's ability to we do some stuff around response inhibition, which is where people have to not respond. And we see that the logos, food logos, they make them accidentally kind of press the space bar, even though participants know they shouldn't press the space bar. Again, they're earning money for being correct. And we see that this kind of like behavioral invigoration. So we're trying to measure these things to try and quantify what effect do these things, these brand logos, they're so distinctive, they're so well learned. What effect are they actually having on choice? So there's been some great studies with children where you can wrap carrots in McDonald's wrapping or just have them like in plain brown wrapping. And then you ask the kids, which one tastes better? And they're all like, oh, the ones wrapped in the McDonald's wrapping are so much better. I mean, you can't really do that with adults because adults, they know that you're trying to, that they can see through the experiment. So you start to
You
get...
can do it with wine.
Yes, you can do it with wine. Yeah. But yeah, we're trying to get kind of evidence in the lab quantifying the effect of these things. So I'm really interested to move more into that space of, and I guess this comes down to impact as well. So understanding, should we be kind of limiting junk food advertising? A lot of countries have done that, right? They've limited junk food advertising to children because, yeah, advertisers, like someone said to me at this conference, advertisers always say, oh, don't worry, they're not affecting anyone. The adverts don't work. It's not affecting anyone's behavior. We don't need to worry about people being triggered by gambling ads. It's not having any effect. But then they're spending absolutely millions of dollars on advertising. So obviously it is having some effect, and we all know it's having some effect, and it's probably not very positive. So
I think
I'm really
we know it's having an extreme effect. Otherwise, we wouldn't have APS and APRA guidelines about advertising. If we said it didn't have any effect, then we could all go out and say, I'm an expert and I'm better than the other experts. We know the effect is incredibly strong. We know the effect is incredibly strong because some countries don't allow for pharmaceuticals to be advertised. Others do, and the rates of use are very different. I think advertising is unbelievably powerful. As a matter of fact, this is why we pick schools for our kids in very unique ways, thinking that they might be advertised one thing over another as to, whatever it is that we believe as parents. I think that, just messaging altogether, the whole space of certainly, probably the last 5 years or maybe more has been a little bit more, at least in the social media space, talking about censorship. There's a reason why there's censorship, because if we say you don't get the other message, then you can't entertain the other message, which means it can't influence you. If we only gave one party all the advertising dollars and the other one had none, we just kind of, I think there was even someone said, I can't validate this, but a lot of voting goes on familiarity of face. If you know the person, you know the name, you just go familiar equals safe. So, I don't follow it all, so I'll just go with what's familiar.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a strong familiarity effect.
Yep. Yeah. So it's for such a fascinating space, because I imagine advertising is ridiculously powerful in how we see rewards. Like everyone likes to have I don't know, Armani or Gucci or something. I'm not sure. I'm not too good at the brands, but it's not salient for me, but it certainly is for many. But I have my own salient things that are important. I don't know if it's some, camping gear or something. It's fascinating because we tell each other, we say, this is this brand, or, I picked up a pair of X. There's some sort of status that's attached to everything as well. That clearly is a reward.
Sure, yeah. There's a lot of rewards around us, and yeah, everyone has their own things that they value. And the thing with advertising, though, is that it's tricky to quantify the success, right? And I was talking about this with someone who works in the marketing team for a big, big company, and they kind of, for them, a successful marketing campaign is about reach. So they don't actually know whether it actually influenced someone's purchasing decisions, but they see it as if people can, if they're surveyed and they say, oh, yes, I've seen this advert on TV, then that's like a successful campaign. And same with government health campaigns, right? It's about an incredibly successful health campaign is one where people can recall it, and it's about reach.
Yeah.
What effect does it actually have on behavior? That's often very hard to measure and quantify. So you kind of have this gray area where we just kind of say, yeah, we know advertising's powerful, but what's it actually doing? And we don't really have any data on it. So I see that as like a really interesting space. And we're starting off in the lab with these tasks that we've been using for a long time, so that we can really try and look at how they actually affect your attention or your ability to not press the space bar when you know you shouldn't be pushing it. But yeah, getting that into, that's kind of where my interests lie at the moment, is to get more into this.
I think what's my apologies jumping in. I think where the most dialed down data is actually in your Facebooks, your Instagrams, your Google, because they do have unbelievable metrics for advertising based on clicks, how much time you've spent on a page, where your cursor was, what you did click on, what you didn't, how long you spent there, obviously your cohort around you, what other things you've looked at, whether you did go out and do a conversion, which might be a sale. There's an infinite number of things. You just got to be a whiz to do that stuff, and that's part of the problem. But I think the metrics are there because they're tracking every single minute thing. That's the whole business model of saying we're going to go out to advertisers, and the very sophisticated ones can know what we want and how to position it. And these days, how to give me an ad that's specific to me and how to give you an ad that's specific to you to sell the same thing.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. I also, at the same health psychology conference, saw a talk about limbic capitalism, which is this term that's been phrased, and this really interesting idea about how, the powerful, the social media companies are just, they're not interested in us being social with one another. They're purely there to make us consumers. And they're the way that the advertisers target people at different times of the day, the amount of young people. So this group at Auckland University are actually asking students to take screenshots of all the ads they see on social media and log the time of day, and trying to get some data on, what are young people being targeted with? And you see that it's gambling ads, it's vaping, it's alcohol use, it's all of these really unhealthy, on a Friday night, the McDonald's targeted ads will come through. So it's really time of day demographic trying to sell you stuff and really promote pretty unhealthy lifestyles, right? So as someone, at this health psychology conference, that was kind of the main kind of message was they're just having this incredible effect on people's lifestyles, and encouraging this new generation of people to be interested in alcohol use or vaping or all of these things that we know are best not to get into when you're 15 years old. So it's a really interesting space. And I've always been a bit skeptical about the brouhaha around social media, the way the government banned it for young people last year. I thought that was an incredibly knee-jerky reaction to something where we don't really have data to suggest that it's linked to problems of mental health, or that it's causing, attention problems, all of these kind of things that you often hear, that the data is not very clear, I would say. There's a lot of correlational evidence. So we know that, people who struggle paying attention in class often use social media more. We know that people who report, young people with higher anxiety and depression, report using social media more. But probably that's not the social media causing those problems. It's that person already has those issues, and social media might be a way of, escaping from the world. Or if you're not going out, then you're spending a lot more time on your phone. Or if you're someone who gets very distracted easily, if the phone wasn't there, something else would be distracting you. So I think I think that we don't really have evidence yet that social media per se is causing all these problems. But I must admit, when I saw this talk about this limbic capitalism and realizing the extent to which young people are targeted through just constant consumer goods, I must admit, I kind of thought, wow, that in itself is a reason to be concerned about things like social media, but not just for young people, I think for everybody. It's, we want to live we're trying to be moving towards a more sustainable world, which just doesn't fit with this capitalist buy everything consumerism that's being promoted. It's a very interesting space.
Yeah, I haven't sort of followed up on any of the research, but I know that Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, obviously is big, broad, and so on and so forth. But it does have a compelling argument in terms of even simple things like opportunity cost. If kids are engaging, for example, spending X amount of hours on any device, he wasn't necessarily just talking about social media. It was on any device, even just use of computer games. They would just have less practice socializing, and just purely on I don't know, if you go out and say 7,000 hours was missed out on socializing, that 7,000 hours might equate to something. Obviously, I haven't done the research, but it's fascinating to consider anyway.
I think there's a lot of issues with a lot of the research in that book. And I think, young people are socializing. They're socializing when they play video games. They're all connected up, and for a lot of people, this is incredibly beneficial for their mental health because they are able to socialize, and they don't have to, I think back to when I was a young person, a teenager, we would often use alcohol to be able to socialize in person. Whereas, that's one reason why we think alcohol use is so much lower in teenagers these days, is that they are able to socialize, but they're able to do it in a way that's maybe, people who are a bit more introverted, who are less comfortable around others, they don't need to be in the same physical space. And we might think that's a problem, but actually, they're still getting that social engagement, and they're actually not having to use things like alcohol as a crutch to allow them to be able to relax in that environment. So it
might have a moderating effect to the volume of alcohol that's being used. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and it's just a different way of socializing that we think is problematic. But in terms of, making strong connections, having people around you that you can go to if you've got problems, that's still, the young kids, they still have that, even if they're not seeing their friends in the same way that we used to. So I think, we need more data, but I think a lot of it is just also realizing that's young people's world now. And it's funny with this whole limbic capitalism thing that young people know that they're being advertised to constantly. They know that that their data is being used and sold to all the companies. For them, that's just par for the course. That's just the way things are, and they're actually very adept, and that is their life. And I would be very concerned about the negative effects of cancelling social media for young people, particularly, young people who might live remotely, who, young gay and LGBTQ individuals who don't have anyone around them, and then they can have this whole incredible support network online. They might suddenly be missing out. And the other thing is that pushing young teenagers into because they're still going to use social media. They're just not going to be using social media where adults are present and perhaps moderating some of
Yeah.
the interactions, right? So you're pushing them into dark spaces where there's no one there to say, hey, that's not okay. You can't share that. You can't talk like that. You can't do that, which I think is potentially a negative thing. So it's a very complex issue, but I think, yeah, we don't necessarily have data to suggest it's really damaging people. Yeah, we might get that data in the future. But
Yeah.
right now, there's a lot of evidence that actually, it's the same things that are affecting young people's mental health are the same things that have always been affecting them, which is academic pressure from parents and schools, bullying, and yeah, those seem to be kind of still the main things that young people report is affecting their mental health.
So much to be desired in terms of knowing the answers. These complex spaces always make it impossible to know, and hence the need for more research. Unfortunately, with places like advertising, there's a lot of guessing because correlation doesn't equal causation, and even when there is a causation, you still don't know how to apply it in a direct real world scenario. It could be because you know to do such good research means you've got to go out and control for every
Yeah,
other extraneous variable, and the real world does not go out and do that. It's much easier with pathologies, with medicine and the like, not so
yeah,
much in our world, but it's always fascinating to look at it, and that sort of concept of limbic capitalism is such a great term. I really love that. I'm meant to
yes.
looking into that a little bit more because I think there's
Yeah,
something.
there's a book about it, which is, yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, great.
And yeah, I must admit I was always very skeptical about the harms of social media, but I must admit, thinking about it from this perspective of the constant advertising, and it's just and the fact that we don't know, right? So there's no data available to tell us, what are young people, how many adverts is a young person receiving per day for unhealthy food or for vaping or for alcohol?
Mm,
That data is not made available to us. And they have the data and they can tell a lot, and they're just using it to sell more stuff, which is, probably highly unethical. So in a way, it's good that Australian government has said, and that, this needs regulation. This is not okay. And because all governments have got exactly the same issues going on, all governments are struggling with the effects of social media and the constant advertising and just the way it's not regulated at all.
mm.
So I think the Australian government, that's kind of one positive thing, is that they've kind of said, it's got to stop. Something has to change. You shouldn't be able to advertise to people under 18, or yeah, there should be some
Yeah.
laws in place. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops.
And also having an understanding of what the data actually is. When it was on television, we knew what everybody received because everyone received the exact same thing. At 6:30 at night while the news was on, everyone, observed 30 seconds of this ad. Now we don't know what we each receive because it's
Yeah.
individualized, and on that basis, yeah, clearly. Well, my apologies. I believe that the advertising is becoming better because it's more sophisticated, it's more targeted. They must be spending a lot more money in that because it has value for them. They're not just going, oh, let's go to all this length to
Oh,
do it. It
exactly.
must be data that's demonstrated it's much more valuable. And we've kind of known this. For example, we don't show kids certain ads because we know that's not wise to do so, and we've got limits and so on and so forth. We've kind of got a scenario where we don't know what's happening. There probably are some limits, but as everything, we human beings find loopholes and different ways to do the same thing in different ways and different messaging and so on. But yeah, much to be learned, and data, I think, is the first point of saying let's get some transparency so we know what we're dealing with, because it'll tell a lot of the story, I imagine, or at least you can start to deduce from it.
Yeah.
Poppy, where can people find out more about your work, about this space, if they want to continue the conversation? Are there, particular websites that are useful or literature? Obviously, your studies that have been published. Where can people find out more?
Yeah, so a lot of our studies, I have a personal profile at UTS, University Technology Sydney, where I'm a lecturer. So there's links to a lot of publications there. I would say, yeah, that there's some interesting review papers that should be free to everyone to read. Of course, academic texts are sometimes not particularly easy to go through. Sadly, I've not written a popular science book. That would be much better. But I think, the limbic capitalism stuff, there's a really interesting book that's been written that's definitely worth a read. So I can put the link for that. The name's escaping me right now. But yeah, in general, I think it's just, please email me for any follow-ups if anyone's interested in getting hold of literature or papers in this domain.
Love it. I wonder if these days you could upload an academic text into Grok or ChatGPT or Gemini and have a summary that still provides findings and enough context that means that for those who aren't well versed or a bit bored by it, might be able to still get some of the juice from the findings, because the research is so important. I think if we go from the premise of try and understand methodology and the like so that we can validate its solid research, and then apply have a look at the findings, then I think we're starting from a really beautiful place. So maybe that's a new way that technology allows us to all be able to access the same information.
Yeah, I think there are now some good summary tools that you can have as plugins. Of course, all of our students are doing that too, to avoid having to actually read any of the academic papers we set them. And like I said, students, you do have to be a bit careful because it can still get methodological details a bit wrong. But yeah, in general, the summary of the research should be able to do a decent job.
I tell you what, you've got your work cut out for you in that sort of world, because I've been scratching my head going, the whole way that we do academic knowledge and validating whether kids understand something or not has to change, because these tools are just getting
it's pretty amazing
so
how
advanced.
2 years ago the whole approach was, okay, we have to stop students using it and figure out how we can stop them using it and how we can catch them. And already that's completely flipped to say these tools are going to be around forever and we have to try and help students learn how to do it better. And so now we've got tutorials on how to use ChatGPT to generate ideas for assignments, or what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. The thing is, though, that they're great tools and we all use them a lot in our research, in our daily work lives to kind of make things more efficient. But you do have to, you can never copy paste from ChatGPT into a thing and be like, that's great. There's always, you need to understand how to tweak things, you need to know its limitations. And so you unfortunately do still need to know the knowledge. But it's a really interesting phenomena in higher education for sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be something to watch. But Poppy, thank you so much for your time and your insights. It's absolutely fascinating to think about how we're geared. Our design is just so strong, but also trying to understand some of the moderating factors, particularly around how salient something is, and I think we can come up with our own ways about how it's effectively changing my relationship with something, and in some sense training that. There might be some exposure stuff that psychologists could think about, and relating to that, and also I think even that world around the limbic response. If we talk about the limbic capitalism, that's us trying to go out and saying, let's not necessarily just follow that immediate space, if we do some work around that, I can change my relationship to those things. At least these are the takeaways that I'm going to think about a whole lot more. So yeah, thank you so much for your expertise, your knowledge, your research, and taking the time. It's been amazing. So really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been great.